So hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Self-Sabotage Show. I'm here with Tony from Indianapolis in the US, and we have a very interesting guest for you today to share his personal story. So I'm really looking forward to the interview today with Tony. And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone, please, Tony?
Yeah, I'm Tony, and I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. Tony Lungabardi, and I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I was welcomed onto the show from Damian, and we're going to talk a little bit about my story, some difficult things I think, and some hopefully some good little tools and tidbits to help everybody on their own self-sabotage journey.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks, Tony. And we really appreciate you reaching out to be a guest with us today because your story is quite unique, and I'm looking forward to you being able to share it with our listeners today. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background. How would you describe what you
Yeah.
do now and your background as to how you got to do what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So right now, I repurposed my life along this, the pandemic journey. I decided that I just wanted to stop trying to live in this four-wall brick and mortar style industry that it may not exist in a year. So I decided to become a life coach, which is a passion of mine that I've always had in my social circles. I've always been that friend that everybody goes to. For whatever reason, that I've always been that friend that everybody goes to and says, can you help me with X? Can you help me with this? My relationship, my baby mama, living situation, my parents, my drug usage, whatever it may be, I was always there. So as I grew in skill set, grew in education, and grew most importantly in confidence, I was able to really change what I think that I am capable of, right? Because I was a bartender forever because that's all I thought I was worth, right? And finally, I was like, you know what? I have the courage, I have the skill sets. I'm gonna try. The worst that's gonna happen is I'm gonna fail. So, and all of this has kind of been bred out of my journey as a kid. Like I was adopted when I was 2. I was found in a shed in Alaska. And I went through foster home and foster home and foster home, and finally got adopted into a very nice, abusive, emotionally and physically family that put on a good mask. So when the foster care workers were around, it was all glory. Everything was beautiful. Jesus praised everything, right? But behind the closed doors, it was very, very different. And so after about 10 or 15 years of that, my mom, during the internet surge of texting and messaging in the 90s, she found a Canadian guy, and they went off to marry each other. Well, he moved up to be with her. His wife in Canada committed suicide, so they went to go clean all that up, and ended up getting married and left me and my brother. So and we had to figure it out. And so I was 14. My brother was 9. He went to stay with his dad. I was not having it anymore, so I've just been wandering since. And so from that point to about 20, I was homeless, living on the streets, in and out of hostels, abandoned buildings, streets, whatever I could find myself. At the worst of it, I think months at a time, I was living homeless on the streets in Alaska, in Anchorage, Alaska. And some of those nights were tough, right? Through the winter, negative degrees. But outside of that, after that, I think that wasn't even the hardest part, right? The physical homelessness, of course, being a young age. It's what happened after. How do I get that out of my head? How do I have the courage and confidence to know that I'm worth more than that? And so that was the next, from 20 to about 30, roughly 32. Trying to stop living the lifestyle of the streets, not feeling like I need anything, or the fear of my next meal, my sleeping, if I'm gonna get fired for something that I wore that day. I don't know. So that's a part of it. Is there more that I should share? So yeah, that led me into life coaching, and I also, when I turned 30, I did this Mankind Project retreat, and it's kind of like a men's weekend ritual journey that some people consider kind of cultish. It has a lot of sacred nature to it. I don't experience a cult, and it really helped me find courage, be accountable, and start using some more tools to emotionally stabilize myself. And now I'm the leader here in Indianapolis, and yeah, it's an international organization, and I repurposed my life into coaching, and I'm really trying to create this message on what healthy masculine looks like in our social groups. Um, we talk a lot about toxic masculinity, right? We all know what that term is. What is the opposite?
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful, Tony, and thank you so much. It's such a story. I mean, wow, you didn't tell me all of that when we first spoke. So,
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg too, right?
yeah,
That's just
yeah,
the broad. Before I
sure.
even really get into like my mom, a biological mom and her drug usage and prostitution, and she was
Wow,
14 when she had me too, maybe 13,
wow,
something like that.
wow,
So there's more. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I don't want to
wow.
start janking out any tears here. It's just that's my experience, my story.
Your story and your journey. So one of the things that you spoke about, which I was absolutely blown away by, was when you were experiencing your period of homelessness between 14 and
Mm,
20, and you were
mm,
saying that it was so cold I mean, Alaska is one of the coldest places, right? And you were saying that you would literally walk all night to avoid being frozen to death, because if you'd have
yeah.
stayed still out in the open, homeless in Alaska, you'd have frozen to death. So tell us a little bit about that experience. What must have you been thinking about at that point?
Yeah. So I wasn't really thinking about a lot outside of like, I wasn't ever victim myself. I'd never victimized myself, right? In those moments, there was opportunities for me to live in shelters and things like that, but they had rules, and
Mm,
I didn't want to follow the rules.
mm,
So I chose, which a lot of homeless people do, we choose living on the streets because of the freedom we get to live by our own rules, get as drunk or as hammered on whatever drug that we want, and live by our own rules. So we choose that. And I 100% um, did not want to follow rules. So they would kick me out and I wouldn't have anywhere to go. And so in those deep Alaskan winter months, it would get below 20 Fahrenheit, below 40 Fahrenheit. And a lot of times, what I would do is I would walk to the gas station. I just go to the gas station, and inside the bathrooms and gas stations are fans, right?
mm.
And I would just warm my hands, warm my feet in the bathrooms, and then I would sleep
Wow.
during the day because a lot of the day shelters they didn't really kick anybody out. You left for the day, but you can come back the next day because
Mm,
they understood kids and people that are homeless are dealing with a lot of stuff. You know, mostly undiagnosed mental illnesses or undiagnosed trauma of some sort.
mm,
And that's what we all experience. So behind all of those drug usage or those drug addictions is something traumatic that nobody
mm.
wants to talk
Yeah,
about,
exactly.
leading them to that evil place.
Yeah. So the title of our show is the Self-Sabotage Show. So let's lead that on to the conversation
Sure.
around sabotage. So what areas of your life in particular do you identify where you experience self-sabotage? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So um when I talked about how I got off of the streets when I was finally like I had an apartment or I had a place to live, a room in an apartment for the next 10 years from 20 to 30, that's where I'm still today, it's active, right? I try to go to the gym because I sabotage my own physique. I self-sabotage. I think of myself as an ugly, homeless, skinny kid, all messages my dad gave me. Um, and then, so in my mid 20s, I was emotionally not prepared for life. Nobody taught me these. I had an extreme story, but it's not like you go to school and they teach you about communication through stress, communication through anxiety. They don't teach you that in school. It's just academic based. And that's cool if you're going to be in work your whole life, or if you're going to be in some kind of classroom your whole life, which generally aren't part of our life. But how that works for me is a lot of times I would tell myself before I even try that you're not enough. This is not going to work. And even though I wasn't necessarily a victim, I had pretty good charisma and confidence and such. I just deep down, I was like, who do you think you are? Don't talk to her. She's just going to reject you anyway. Your nose is too big. You have acne. One eye is not the right. Everything's not perfect. So a lot of times I would self-sabotage my own physical agenda.
Yeah. And that's down to, one of our principal saboteurs that we all have, which is the judge. And so inside all of us, we judge ourselves, we judge others, and we judge our circumstances. So we're very hard on ourselves from that perspective. And it's often where we hear that inner voice of, somebody of authority that might have spoken down to us, or even just the inner voice that convinces ourselves that we're not good enough, and that we start to believe that, and we start to get hypnotized by our unconscious saboteur and our unconscious ego, our thoughts, emotions, our beliefs. They start to actually sabotage us and sabotage our results, and we believe it, and we start to then reinforce it, because the unconscious is programming the subconscious mind. And so the subconscious goes out and looks for that to say, no problem, leave it with me. You want to, show up as the skinny kid, I'll give you a circumstance to prove that's going to happen. So yeah, that's definitely sabotaging. What other
And
areas?
it's so slippery too, right? It's
Yeah.
so slippery. Like our unconscious is so slippery. My own self-justifier on why I do these things like this, I tell myself it's because I want to be attractive, but truly because I don't want to be nothing. It's because I don't want to feel this way. It's because I have this inner dialogue that says I'm not enough to judge. You suck. You're terrible. You're ugly. You're skinny. You're X, Y, Z. It doesn't matter. Right? But I tell people, and I run this story about all these good things that I want to be, and say, this little boy inside who's scared and frightened and called names. He's hungry. He's cold.
And you've obviously done a lot of work on yourself to obviously have this awareness and this depth of understanding about yourself and your saboteurs, because many people don't get to this point. But there were some other areas I think you mentioned that kind of get affected by the sabotage. So tell us a little bit about how this kind of manifests into other areas of your life and how it impacts you.
Yeah, relationships specifically is a big one, especially romantic relationships. I never feel like I'm enough in a romantic relationship. So envy, jealousy, things like that come up. And then also as a parent, I'm a single dad. And some of the hardest days of my life are disciplinary actions with my child. Because I want to be everything as far as I can be away from who my father was. And the fact that I can tell my son no sometimes and have to be stern with him, and I have that voice, right? He gave it to me. My dad gave it to me. No matter how much I want to believe I don't have it or I'm nothing like him, when I get angry or when I get frustrated or when I need to be stern, that voice that I'm so scared of comes out. And I sabotage myself. I'll cry myself to sleep. I'll cry myself in the shower. My son will never see it. And it's probably one of the hardest things that I do. So that sabotage comes into overcompensating.
Yeah. And so in terms of the kind of going into the impact around that, and I'd love to, we will talk more about toxic masculinity, because you just sort of mentioned something there that touches on that, but and we'll come to that. So tell us a little bit about the sort of the impact it's had and the suffering that's caused you then in these relationships and with your son as well. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I have been divorced now for 4 years. I don't see, here's the sabotage coming in right now. I tell myself I can't be in a relationship. That's what I tell myself.
That's the dialogue. Yeah.
That's the dialogue. I can't be in a relationship because I'm busy, because I'm doing this, because I emotionally can't give 100%. I can't put a relationship number one. because of how I felt as a kid and the trauma I experienced, I can't put a relationship above my son, which right should be okay. At the same time, find yourself alone that way. I find myself alone that way, right? Um, so divorced. I've been in long-term relationships. None lasted more than 3 years. The most previous relationship was a year, about a year ago. Not that I've given up hope. I just, I don't know if I have the capacity to love as hard and deeply as I used to. Becoming jaded, as we all do when we get older, right? Whether it be in relationships or not. Part of my emotional homelessness that goes into that too. Right? I would rather be alone and work through the issues of the relationship. And then another piece that I didn't talk about, I'm a big runner. I ran away from home. I ran away from my dad. I ran away from my problems. When it gets too stressful, too intense, I run because I'm scared of getting beat up again. I'm scared that once those conflicts happen, what I know is pain. That's what I know. Abuse. That's what I know. And not that it's never happened in my relationships. My marriage was definitely physically and emotionally abusive. And what I did was I just married people that made me feel like what I'm home. Married abusive women. I was in relationships with toxic women. Because that's where I felt safe. That's where I felt closest to home. I felt like, even though on the exterior, but that's more about that. But yeah, part of this sabotage is my running, my fear of conflict. Part of it is the idea that I can't be in a relationship. So that's specific to romantic relationships. I mean, I'm a pretty big introvert. Outside of that, as far as friendly relationships, because I've only been able to rely on myself, right? Another story I tell myself. Because if I rely on somebody else, they're just going to let me down. And what I did from 14 to 25 roughly was all by myself. So when I have that kind of success rate, why am I going to risk it leaving in somebody else?
I mean, really what you've experienced in that part of your life, and particularly the homelessness, is really the way you describe it is like a real survival instinct, right down to the physiological. You've got to make sure that you stay warm, and you've got to find today's meal and avoid getting into conflict with people on the street, because that's a very dangerous place when you're on your own. That's just the coping mechanisms of running are almost like understandable, because clearly there's some real trauma that you've experienced, and so it's natural that in a survival moment, your instinct is the adrenaline gets pumping, and the instinct is to run and to fly, because that's where you can get safety. You can run away from a situation and you can find safety. So we do that. And you mentioned emotional homelessness. So tell us a little bit more about it. Describe that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks. This is a topic that I think a TED Talk was done about me and my story, a TEDx talk, because I just don't think that people, when they're homeless, I don't think that people really understand that there's an emotional aspect to it. There's a freedom to the homelessness. There's a do what I want type of homelessness, which ties into freedom, but we don't have any responsibilities. We don't have any issues with partners or rules or boundaries. There's nothing that it's stopping us. So, and that's the kind of the freedom and the positive that a lot of people can't get past. But once they're able to accept that is not worth their own safety anymore, they start to have to transition, right, from homelessness or the physical homelessness to the physical home. But that doesn't change the emotional part, right? The inside, the stuff we don't talk about, stuff 90% of the world doesn't talk about, but also runs 100% of the world. So the emotional part of it is not only do I have to now go, I have a home to live in, I can't go to X, Y, and Z houses. I have to somehow find a job to support and to keep this thing. And finding a job, I have to also listen to a boss who is going to give me negative feedback, or a teammate, or a customer, or somebody else. And all of these responsibilities are hard. And sometimes so hard and so triggering from our previous trauma that it's too much. So it's unsafe. So that job becomes our trauma. That responsibility becomes our trauma. And that house now becomes our trauma.
Mm.
So I'm safer, which is what I felt for 6 years. I'm safer on the streets than I am dealing with the torment of my boss telling me that I didn't do a good job. Because I know that next step is a black eye, bloody nose, broken rib, broken arm. All things I've experienced. Someone quote tells me, I just want to love you. Why don't you just let me love you? I'm your father. My bruises don't say that.
And that, you know, there'll be many people listening now that have probably never experienced anything like that. And there may be people listening that have experienced that type of level of physical abuse. And what could you say to them that would, you know, somehow help them to understand that there is a different path or a different way in the future?
Yeah, it takes work. It takes work. What I would say to anybody that is listening, that is experiencing something similar, it's going to take work, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be uncomfortable, and you have to push through. If it's physically and emotionally abusive, like really, really do some work on it. If it's physically and emotionally abusive, definitely do something else. But we have to work through our trauma. We have to work through it, because every chance that I get, I'm working through the things that happened to me. So I don't relive the cycle. I don't keep the cycle going. So I'm not inflicting these on my son or my circle. But really, really start looking at it. Unpack the trauma, unpack the fear, start really looking at it, and be honest with yourself. God, of all things, be honest. Stop lying to yourself. It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah, exactly. That sums it up beautifully. And we talked at the beginning a little bit, and we touched on the subject of toxic masculinity. And I know that's something you're quite passionate about. And you mentioned again that you don't want to pass on these things to your son, and you're trying to change the pattern. And so explain to the listeners about the toxic masculinity and what that means to you, and how you're trying to, you know, address that.
Yeah, thanks. Toxic masculinity is something that we in the Mankind Project, which is a male group, a men's group, we talk a lot about all the things that we do in the world and all the things that we see in the world that are toxic, you know, like misogyny, abuse, power differential, money, greed, using our status to get a claim to shame, a claim to fame, using our status to get women, using our status to get romantic relationships, power. So all of that stuff is toxic masculinity. You know, even, you know, trying to be competitive in our friend groups where we, you know, talk negatively about somebody else because we want to show that we are more dominant. This is all toxic stuff. So what I'm trying to create is another conversation, you know, where I've created a t-shirt line that just says healthy masculine energy. And it's an invitation to a conversation. What does it look like to you? To me, it looks different, because I'm a male, and I want to be okay in my heterosexuality. I want to be okay in that. I want to be okay loving my brothers too, right? I want to be okay in my women's circles too, right? Where I'm able to be that guy who's really gonna listen to you and not try to get in your hands. I want to be that guy who's gonna hug my brother because his wife just left him, and let him cry on my shoulder, but not call him gay, not make fun of him because he's sad, or call him weak, call him a victim. I want to be that friend, my healthy masculine friend, who doesn't care what your gender is. loves you as a person and is willing to say that, willing to be close to you.
Mm.
So I just want to invite these conversations wherever I go, where I wear a shirt that says that I want to create that safe place.
Mm, That's beautiful. Thanks, Tony. That's a lovely vision as well. And you know, I've noticed that the level of consciousness seems to be rising worldwide. You know, globally, with people becoming much more aware of not just the fact that toxic masculinity exists and that it's on. You know, there's an agenda, but also the fact that it affects so many women as well, and the fact that we have denied women's power for centuries, almost writing them out of history and writing them out of, you know, all the major religions often are very male dominated, etc. So it's almost as if we've kind of gone to this extreme where we think that only one gender actually should be, you know, in charge of everything. And clearly we know from our experience and research, it proves that actually it's far better if there's a balance where females can embrace their masculine energy but not be overpowered by it. Men can embrace their feminine energy and not be overpowered by it, and be balanced with this letting go of the toxic masculinity. And it's something which I've found, you know, for me in the workplace, for example, I was always repelled by toxic masculinity. It would be people would totally, you know, I would be totally rejecting it and wanting to run away from it. And yet I struggled with, you know, giving up addiction to binge drinking, and part of that would be a culture of, you know, let's drink and drink and drink, which is a kind of, you know, something which is mentally and psychologically is an avoidance, and I'll talk about more about that on another podcast episode. But the point is that we create these habits and these lifestyles where it's then difficult to break those patterns. And toxic masculinity is one of those patterns which, you know, when you're growing up and everyone's saying to you know, big boys don't cry, and you've got to be in charge and show that you're tough, etc. You know, it's just
Yeah,
so damaging, isn't it? You know, to the kind
it's
of
tied into the fabric of who we are as a culture. It's tied
mm,
into this whole
mm,
but it's generational, right? It's not just our fathers or our grandfathers, it's generational. We've been telling people to to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and man up for a long time. That
mm,
you as a man need to do this, or you as a woman need to do this, right? Where I as a man today, I want to be that nurturing man.
mm,
I
mm,
want to be that listening friend, which are all generally very feminist traits, right? Masculinity doesn't listen, which is what we're told, but like it's all tied into the fabric of socially and culturally who we are.
mm.
And it's going to take a lot of work to untie that knot and let us be just who we're going to be. And I just want to start the conversation.
Yeah,
I don't want
exactly.
to
Yeah.
tell anybody who they are, like, because I know a lot of, like, my ex-wife is very masculine,
Mm.
very strong masculine energy, and that's why we work well, because I'm very strong feminine energy, right? And talk to me, you know, express to me, nurture, nurture, nurture. I want to cook, I want to clean, I want to help, I want to support. And then I fight too, right? So my dad taught me that, but there's a trigger, or there's a flip switch, there's a switch to it,
Mm,
and
mm, mm,
in everybody it's different. And what I want to say with this message, in everybody it's
mm, mm. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because that whole balance of, you know, where the feminine and the masculine are living together, you know, there's like a difference in how we operate, and there's a difference in how we think. And when you
Mhm.
can find that perfect moment where you've got the perfect balance of the feminine and masculine, and they've got the perfect balance, it's a
Mhm.
beautiful thing. But as
Mhm.
soon as it becomes
and
imbalanced, it gets distorted.
and it's just a social oppressive construct. This is
Mm,
all what we've created as
mm,
a
mm,
social construct that we can
totally.
choose and use to oppress people, to tell people you need to do this.
Yeah, it's definitely systemic. You're right, Tony. I
Mhm.
think when we look at the systemic problems of how we change that, you've got to look at the education system. You've got to look at
Mm.
religion. You've got to look at the way we govern. We've got to look at the rules. We've got to look at just about everything in life that is part of a system has probably come to a point where we need to review it. And
Mm.
like this, there's this big talk of Project Reset, which is again a whole another podcast series on its
Mm.
own. But we've come to a point where the consciousness is definitely rising, and this sort of systemic change is coming. So explain a little bit about how you then try to ensure that your son gets that balance of that, doesn't get the toxic masculinity, but at the
Yeah.
same time doesn't get away with, being who he wants when he wants without following rules, because there are certain boundaries we have to have for children, and conscious
Yeah.
parenting is about setting those boundaries and giving them lovingly and
Mhm.
caringly and nurturing. So tell us about that, explain that.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult, right?
Mm,
Because as we talked about the social construct, in this his school system, he learns a lot of these lessons that I have to unlearn a lot of times. And really, what I try to teach him is like, we have this saying: "We're good to people's hearts." That's just plain and baseline. If it's good for your heart, if you're being nice to their heart, then it's okay. Outside of that, like I don't really. This is who we are, Tristan. This is what we do. This is who we are. We're good to people's hearts. We're good. We try. We work our hardest. We ask questions. We love genuinely, authentically. We express it. When he gets emotional, he's incredibly emotional. I'm emotional, but this kid is emotional. And I try to, okay, let's sit with it, which is something we don't do. We're not taught anywhere. Let me sit with
mm,
it.
mm,
Men fix it. Women listen.
mm,
Let's just sit together. So I sit with him and we work through it. I let him calm down. I try not to get too triggered by it because I'm usually like trying to get him to do something, and he's like getting emotional, and nothing's getting done, and then we're late.
mm, mm.
So yeah, be good to people's hearts.
Yeah. And that's beautiful, Tony, and that's such a great philosophy to have, and a great kind of mantra, and a great way to bring up kids as well, to teach them that. But a lot of
Mhm.
people maybe who are listening are, might have strong religious beliefs, for example, and
Mhm.
they would probably really be drawn to that and say, well, that's what being a Christian is about, or that's what being someone in in whatever religion they might follow,
Mhm.
uh, whatever philosophy or religion they might believe in. It's like the way you've described it is almost like what the teachings are about being a good person and how you love others and serve others, etc. So how do you kind of get the balance between the religion and that kind of just being a really nice person?
Yeah, that's a tough question. That's a tough question. I have not seen the good heart of religion that you speak of.
Hmm,
My religion was beaten into me,
hmm, hmm,
so I don't know what that looks like.
hmm,
I've heard of it, right? I've heard of it talked about with pastors in their $1 million airplanes, $1 million mansions. I've heard of it, sure. But what I would kind of like encourage people is like we all are trying to anchor in some kind of definition into something. Like, what does it mean? Where do we get this? How do I anchor this and define it so that I can give them reason to keep going?
hmm.
How do I justify? Like I have my own big inner self justifier, right? So this is a way I think that people will use to anchor their this is why we do this because you want X to happen to you, karma to happen to you, or you want uh, forever living with Jesus or whatever it may be. All of these different things tied into some kind of structural plan. When the structural plan should just be a good person, just be
Hmm.
good. Who cares what happens after that? Who cares what the end goal is? Be a good person, good things will
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's about that consciousness and that kind of,
happen.
really understanding yourself and understanding others to such a degree where you can have empathy and compassion for that person and not judge them in any way, shape or form. And that, to me, I think a lot of religions stray into judging others, whether they believe in something that they believe in, or whether they practice, in a very orthodox way or a very unorthodox way, and whether they attend or don't attend a particular service or a reading, that type of thing. So I think there's like
And
such a
I don't want to discredit anybody and their
exactly
belief system.
no 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 no
Everybody is welcome. Whatever you use to encourage this type of goodness in you, wherever it comes from, please continue that.
yeah
The
absolutely.
goodness part of it, because my grandmother was a Christian, going to church all the time, beat her religion into my dad, who transformed that and beat that into me. She would, my sisters, my aunts, or not my sisters, but my aunts, my dad's sisters, would tell him stories about when they would go out on dates with boys back in the 60s or whatever it was, and how my mom would figure out if they were with a man, or figure out if they lost their virginity. Can you guess how she would do that?
Oh man, I don't even want to know.
Yeah, exactly. So the worst place that you could think of for her to try to guess if she's been with a man, or if the girls, her daughters have been with a man, is how she figured that out.
Whoa.
As a Christian woman. And
Wow.
that's how my dad learned how to parent. So what I did was everything that he did and said, just do the opposite. There's some things that, there's some things that are like his humor. I have his humor. He's, in most times he was pretty funny until that switch. And I try to like dull that switch a little bit as I get older. And as I try to become a parent, but religion is tough for me. And I don't want to discredit it on this show or to anybody else, because it's a really good place when it's done with good people.
Yeah, I know so many people that I'm so grateful to have met them and to have had them in my life. And I've been so fortunate in my experience of religion has actually been very positive. But at the same time, I know that, people like yourself have experienced something quite the opposite. But, as you say, when we're raising consciousness and we're living with compassion and empathy for others, as you say, if it means that they open their heart and can see, service to others is something which is powerful, and they get that through the religion, that's beautiful. So you've been on quite a journey, Tony, and what I'm curious to know, and maybe you can share with the listeners, is how you then began to recover from this kind of suffering and the impact it had. And tell us and explain a little bit about the journey of how you've been able to heal that suffering.
Yeah. I always struggle with this question. I always struggle because I don't have a good answer. I don't. The only thing that I could really ever attest to as far as how I've gotten where I'm at today is I truly, and I'm writing a book about this. This is part of what I coach on, is our own inner victim. I have never victimized myself. I have never said I am negative way because this happened to me. I am this traumatic kid because this happened to me. No, I am this beautiful man because all of this happened to me. I flip my victim all the time. I've always done that since I was a kid. It's something innate in me for whatever reason. When I was getting beat up by my dad, my mom would come to me and she'd try to console me, and I'd end up consoling her, telling her that it was okay. Listen, Mom, it's okay. It's just a black eye. We'll just tell the teachers that I got it at. Don't worry. Don't worry. So I've always had this, and I don't know what it is. I can't teach this. I can talk about it enough so people can at least identify it and start working on it themselves. But our own inner victim will either drive the bus or be a passenger. That choice is yours. The inner victim is not going away.
Yeah. And that's lovely that you've been able to identify that and also to label it to the point where you kind of really understand it, and acknowledge that it exists, but you don't feed it. It's like the story of the Indians, where they talk about, you inside of us we have a hungry wolf, and we have
Hmm.
the wolf
Hmm.
that's satisfied and is good, and is no danger. And whichever one is the one that comes out is the one that we feed. So it's whether we feed the hungry wolf, or feed the angry wolf, or feed the happy
Hmm.
wolf.
Yeah, it's the same with a victim.
Mm,
We've all, I mean, I tell people this all the time. Everybody's like, how did you do it? Your journey, your journey. And I'm like, no, my journey is my journey.
mm,
Your experience is also traumatic to you. Just
yeah,
because it wasn't the same as mine doesn't mean it wasn't, doesn't mean it didn't
yeah,
hurt you.
yeah.
So you have to, as people, figure out your own victim, how they perpetrate your life,
Mm,
right?
mm,
How does your victim perpetrate your life? And start to get real like romantic with your victim.
mm,
Start
mm,
to persuade your victim to sit in the passenger seat and love on your victim, love on that inner kid, that inner
mm.
child. Just wanted to be safe.
Yeah.
And that would be my first suggestion to people when they're trying to, even with their self-sabotage. What is it that you're running from or hiding from
Mm,
that you're
mm.
sabotaging yourself about?
Yeah, yeah. That's really good awareness, because when people understand what it is that they're trying to avoid or running away from, and where the self-sabotage is being driven from, that's the kind of first point where you can say, okay, now I understand myself.
Mhm,
Now I understand
mhm,
what I'm afraid of, or what I'm avoiding, or what I'm
mhm,
judging myself about. And then you
mhm.
can start to actually address it. And one of the
Yeah.
first ways that we do that is absolutely through compassion and empathy for
Mm,
yourself. It
I like that.
starts from within. I've got this saying that love is an inside job, and it totally is. You have to start on your inside and on yourself first, to be able to then be of service to others and love others. Because if you don't love yourself enough, and you've got those toxic thoughts, or those sabotaging beliefs, or sabotaging behaviors, then you're not going to be able to be of service to others through your heart, and through giving and contributing to others, and bringing out the best in them.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, it takes work,
Mm, mm,
work, 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 work.
totally.
Long time work. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in one session. It's not going to happen this year. So, but if you want it to, it will happen.
Mm, mm,
I mean, all of the time that you spend, I tell all my clients, especially around their fitness, around their health and things like that, how long did it take you to get to the weight that you're at? 12 years, right? That's how long it might take to get the opposite, to
mm,
get it away. So start doing the work now and
yeah.
don't expect it to come tomorrow, because you will be disappointed.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's really true. And I think that's a good reality check for people who perhaps
Mhm.
looking for a quick fix, that often
Nope,
it doesn't
doesn't
come.
exist.
And exactly, yeah, you got to
Does
work
not
at it. You got to
exist.
work at it. So tell
Yeah.
us a little bit more, Tony, about the Mankind project, and
Okay.
kind stuff that you do.
Yeah. Yeah. So Mankind Project, I'm the leader of Indianapolis, as an inner emotional support and awareness organization that was done or established in the 80s, and they do these men's retreats. We meet usually weekly, depending on your community. I'm the leader of Indianapolis. It's all over the world, some 35 countries, and we do a lot of certifications through the organization as well, to help us become equipped with more facilitation skills, with more awareness skills, with more adaptation skills, with more ways to get rid of our toxic masculinity, problem solving. Um, and there's a format to it. It's structured a little bit. It's free. It's open. It's probably the safest place that I can think of for me to tell people the truth,
Mm, mm,
which nobody wants to hear, right? Nobody wants the truth.
mm,
Give me that glossy, nice, whatever it is.
mm.
Because the truth hurts. I'm not so good with it. But this is, I would say, if you have a community, you can go on mankindproject.org. You can look for me. I'm the leader of Indianapolis. I'm more than happy to help anybody try to find their safe space.
Mm, mm. That's great, Tony. Thank you. And in terms of that organization, what's their kind of what's their approach to someone who's struggling maybe to, maybe they're a leader and they're the CEO of a company, and they've got to be strong and they've got to show strength and show leadership. How can they then embrace this sort of, or reduce this toxic masculinity to try to introduce a more kind of broader, softer side that's going to be more, conscious to others, and bring out their potential and fully bring
Yeah.
out the best in others?
Yeah. A lot of people are really like enamored by this idea of bringing out their potential, right? We all are. We don't know this, but we all are already the gift. Like, there is nobody like you. Nobody in the world. There is one. There is one Damian, and that gift is enough already. So we stop. We to these leaders, these CEOs, we say, stop trying to impress upon everybody, because you're already worth it. You're already beautiful. You're already amazing. A lot of times we're trying to impress them. I'm trying to impress them, even though I hate them. I want to impress my parents so that I can be enough. And try to like unveil that trauma, that issue. You don't have to impress them. You don't have to make them happy anymore. You don't have to do these things. You know already you're amazing and beautiful, and there's nobody like you. So enjoy it. We do a lot of things around. There's a lot of leadership coaching. There's a lot of emotional awareness, right? Because nobody tells us emotions. My dad taught me one emotion: anger. I didn't really learn how to love. I learned how to love through anger. Sure. I didn't really learn how to be sad. I learned how to be sad through anger, right? But don't cry, or I'll give you something to cry about. Shame, fear, guilt, sadness, joy. I mean, I got a little bit of joy from them because we went fishing and things like that. But outside of that, we're never really taught how to express emotions or how to deal with them, especially as men.
Wow, sounds amazing.
Did I answer the question? I kind of went on a tangent.
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay.
No, it's cool. I think we've directed people in the place where they can find out more, and you've explained it in enough detail probably for people to say yes, it's for them, or they want to find out more and they're curious, or perhaps that they're not wanting to pursue it. But that's everyone's individual, and as you say, we're all unique.
Yeah, and we're all unique, and people's time to have their own inner journey will come when they're ready.
Yeah,
we don't ever try to. Yeah, we don't ever try to force people into this, because as we know through all kinds of other experiences, you cannot force recovery on anybody. Emotional, addict related, or spiritual, you cannot force recovery on anybody. Mankindproject.org, Healthy Masculine Energy Facebook page. You can look at me up. I'm sure there's plenty of other opportunities and places that will promote this kind of same thing, this inner journey, this inner, as you say, love, right? Loving yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of wrapping up our conversations, it's been lovely to talk to you, Tony, and thank you so much for sharing your journey and talking so openly about some of your experiences. What's the kind of one thing that you would tell the listeners right now to really give them hope that they can overcome their sabotage? What's the kind of the closing remarks, if you like?
It takes work, and be honest with yourself. The pain of honesty is much, much less than the pain of dishonesty. The pain of lying is so great, because you have to keep up that lie, and then you have to tell yourself that lie, and then you find yourself 50 or 60 years old still living that lie. So just be honest with yourself. Ask for help. Love yourself too. That's the hard one, right? Love yourself, but love yourself enough to just be honest, and then the rest of the work will come. And don't stop.
That's beautiful. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Once you start that journey of recovery and healing, it's almost like a kind of door is opened and you've gone through that threshold of the pain and suffering. You're ready for that healing. And beyond the threshold of the pain and suffering is that beautiful journey of
Mhm.
going within and discovering who you truly are, the truth of what your potential is, and learning to love yourself again and learning how to cope with emotions and deal with that.
And the
So
work doesn't stop. The work, it doesn't stop. Like once you
exactly,
go through the
exactly.
door, the work isn't over, right?
Yeah,
You don't get to sit on
yeah,
your couch and pretend like
yeah,
everything's fine because it's not.
yeah,
Your trauma is sneaky.
yeah,
Your
yeah,
self-justifier, your self-judge, your self-saboteur
yeah,
is sneaky. Work will continue and it
yeah.
doesn't stop. So
Totally, totally. And it's a little bit, we always say, look, personal development and that growth and that journey is a little bit like showering and washing. You have to do it
mm,
on a frequent basis because otherwise other people begin to pick up on the toxicity of it. So,
it's true.
yeah, totally
It's a
get it.
great, yeah, it's a great metaphor.
Tony, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm so grateful, and I'll put all your contact details in the introduction so
Yeah,
listeners
thank you so
can
much.
reach out to you. And I really appreciate you sharing your story with us and just kind of experiencing the journey. And it's been very moving talking to you, so I really appreciate it. And
Mm.
I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Yeah,
So
thank you so much. I'd love to be on anytime. Anytime. I love being able to talk about this stuff. I love being able to share this stuff. I love being able to have these conversations because it's why I wear the shirt so
yeah,
that we can start getting more comfortable. It's difficult, but we gotta do it.
exactly. That's beautiful. Thanks, Tony. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode
Mm.
and I look forward to catching up with you again soon. Keep listening, keep safe. Thanks.